All right, welcome to Engage ICT. I'm Sarah Jane Crespo. The internet age brought a seemingly endless supply of advantages, which we are all very familiar with, from the ease of communication to information and entertainment that is constantly at our fingertips. But for young people who never knew a world before the World Wide Web, there are social and psychological pitfalls to living life online. So let's talk about ways to live well in a technologically immersive world, both for younger generations and for older. On our panel this evening, we have Wichita State University psychology intern Shawn Leslie, KMUW digital news reporter Hugo Phan, Emily Rodriguez with the Mental Health Association of South Central Kansas, and content creator Lexi Phan. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's have a little applause for our panel. So an article by Cheyenne Hunt called Gen Z-nomics states, Gen Z, the demographic cohort born between 1997 and 2012, is the first to grow up fully immersed in technology. As such, the Zoomers are known for a high level of digital savviness. So there's comfort with technology. Hugo, I want to start with you. Can you talk about some of your favorite tools for online use, and what do you use the most to save you time and just make life all around better?
Well, I'm not a Zoomer myself. I'm a millennial, but I am a digital early adopter instead of a digital native, and I have always been interested in the internet and just living online way too much since I found Zanga in the 7th grade. Yeah, just the tools that I use in general. I use TweetDeck at work to kind of keep an eye on the stream conversations and streams and stuff like that, and just this social media in general. You can, if you know how to navigate your way through each of the platforms, they're different in terms of how you navigate to them, how you find conversations, how you find dialogue, things that you're interested in. If you know what you're looking for. Each platform is different in the way you look for conversations and things like that. Like if you're on Twitter, if you can build yourself a good, follow the people that you like and the people whose opinions you respect, that way you can curate a good list of opinions that you value and stuff like that. And there's a function in search where you can search a topic and then you can look for people you follow. And then you can see each of the people, talk about the thing you're wanting to talk about. So there are ways to navigate each social media platform.
It sounds like a lot of social media, different platforms are different and require kind of different levels of work from the user. You're talking about carefully curating your Twitter platform, whereas on TikTok, or your Twitter feed, I should say, on TikTok, for example, you're kind of the algorithm kind of works for you just based on how you swipe.
Yeah,
go ahead.
That comes with being more intentional with your social media too. Sometimes it's nice to sit back and watch the algorithm wash over you and kind of let them feed you things. But it's also nice to pick the things that you want to follow and watch, and and express yourself in that way instead of letting something tell you what you are.
So are there a couple of tools that you use at work that are like the most helpful ones? You mentioned TweetDeck. Are there a couple of others that just kind of help with organization or workflow or things that folks might be interested in adopting or using better?
I mean, just the social media platforms themselves are tools. Mm-hmm. They're tools. They're your tools that you're using. I don't think there's anything that I use to augment or engage, interact with the social media tools other than TweetDeck, but just trying to navigate each of those social media platforms. Learning to do that and taking the work upon yourself to do that. It can help you navigate the internet better.
Mm-hmm. And of course, social media can be a full-time job that many people work at for money or not for money. But there is this kind of flip side with social media. And Shawn, I'd like to come to you for this. Given the work that you do, how would you describe the ways that students, Wichita State students and young professionals cope with this immersion of social media that we're in?
Yeah, so it's interesting to encounter people who are dealing with a lot of the immersion in social media and how everything is online these days. And I can't tell you how many people that I have met either in the therapy room or kind of like around Wichita State who have specifically said that they have to either like delete some apps or turn off some apps and have some kind of self-regulation when it comes to the amount of information that they take in. Either because I hear pretty often like the news is a lot, and the news can come from a news app, but it can also come from like TikTok or Twitter or something like that, and it can get overwhelming, or some people can feel a little bit depressed if they feel like they keep seeing bad thing after bad thing after bad thing on the internet, and they kind of have to take a step back from that, and either just delete the app or take a break from it so that they can kind of clear their heads and remember that the world in front of them isn't quite as bleak as what it looks like online.
It seems like there are a couple of different sort of problems contributing to that we get, well, the social media platforms largely try to keep you for longer, for the most part. They're like designed so that you stick with them. So it results in us sort of being on for longer than we've planned. We think we're going to go check Facebook for 2 minutes, and then an hour later, there we still are on Facebook, or whatever it may be. So there's this sort of result of ending up kind of chronically online, and this disconnect between the online world and the real world. Well, if you're also stuck online, so to speak, for longer than you think you are, and you're being subjected to a lot of negative, I don't know, news that depresses you or whatever it is, coming from a psychology background, and also from your experience in the therapy room, what is the result of that?
Sometimes the result of that can be kind of like this influx of information that kind of brings somebody to a conclusion that may be a little bit different from what reality looks like. And particularly online, whenever you think about like Instagram specifically being photocentric, people posting all of the positive things that are happening in their lives and beauty kind of tips and standards and kind of showing off the progress that they're making at the gym or something like that. And if that is the kind of saturation that you're dealing with online, it can look like that is what you're supposed to look like. And that is the way that you can be accepted in the world, is if you look like this, especially if you are looking at a lot of these photos and you're looking at the comments, and the comments are all validating, and you find that one that may be a little bit less than quote unquote perfect, and the comments are less than kind. And so kind of having that like perspective that comes from an online source that may not be kind of the way that people around them are looking at them. And so kind of challenging some of those thoughts is what comes up pretty often.
I'm told there are some technical difficulties with my microphone, so I will now be sharing with Shawn. Thank you, Shawn. So that's interesting, and we hear people talk about the social comparisons. We've heard this for years and years, that the you that you kind of curate for Facebook or for whichever platform, Instagram, and the impression that you're giving to others, not kind of being the genuine impression of it kind of gives a skewed impression of your life. And when you see other people on social medias, and it looks like their lives are all put together, and the truth of your own life, it can be tough. Emily, let's come to you next. How do you think that we sort of got to this point? Do you see a generational difference in the form and frequency of the challenges that people face in trying to create a healthy separation from online life and from social media in particular?
I think part of what started it, at least for me, I first got my phone, I think, when I was 12, and it was for safety reasons. I was going on a vacation, and so my parents thought it would be important for me to have it, and I agreed with that. But then everyone around you, you just start to get word of mouth, and you want to fit in and make sure you're included in everything. And I personally have always struggled with FOMO, fear of missing out. And so first thing I downloaded was Instagram, and I was all about making sure that I perceived myself, or I wanted to make sure others perceived me how I wanted to be perceived. And I think a large portion of my life was spent on social media for a while because I couldn't quite settle with myself or find things to do outside of my phone that were good for me, especially with, like I said, my fear of missing out, focusing too much on that and what I'm missing out on as opposed to what I have currently now. Something else that comes up in some of my social work classes a lot is, like you had mentioned, a lot of the negative things we see in the news and in the media. And me, as a social worker and mental health advocate, I automatically want to do something, and I want to save people. I want to fix everything. And that can be really toxic and really difficult, and it can be overwhelming to people, and it makes people want to avoid the media in general. But to cope with that, that's when we have to come back to the present again and see what you can do here in this moment, even if it's something small, to make that change and to remind yourself that you can make a difference, even if some of these things are out of your control.
Yeah, that's kind of the challenge with the internet that we've seen from the early days of it, that, before, if there were great tragedies happening around on the other side of the globe, you didn't know about them immediately. You didn't know until maybe, the next day when the newspapers hit or whatever. And now we know instantly everything, everywhere, all of the worst things that are happening, or at least a whole lot of them. And yeah, it's depressing, I guess. But so going back to like the generational question, what do you see differences in how Gen Z or millennial are coping versus Gen X and boomers?
It kind of varies, honestly. I think Gen Z is definitely more tied into it, and I think we're so used to it that it's hard to let go of it. And me being one of the Zoomers, recently, I have found that my own anxiety internally that affects everything in my life has been affected by social media, and seeing, as you guys described, that perfect picture that people will put about themselves and curating their profile. I mean, you can look at profiles and you can see people using the same filter on everything because they want it to look a certain way. And for me to cope with that, I mute my apps and I only check them periodically. I think I also have to make sure that I'm not in a poor state of mind before I go into checking those apps, because then that'll just perpetuate the anxiety. I think different generations use social media for different reasons too. I think older generations tend to use it more as a way to connect with family members and to have access to the news. A lot of the Gen Z friends that I do have, I find that our generation isn't as attached to Facebook as some of the older generations, but the people that are attached to it are there because of friends or for networking reasons. And so that's also something to take in consideration as well, how it can be a tool, as we discussed. But yeah.
Well, okay, if older generations are using social media largely to connect with people, how are the younger generations using it?
We're using it to connect with people too, but I think we manifest our relationships online a lot more seriously than older generations do. I think older generations tend to use it as a secondary form of connectivity and a way to communicate with people, because they're so used to talking to people on the phone or seeing people in person, and so they see the social media thing as a secondary thing, if that answers your question.
So it exists more as a primary way of interacting for the younger generations.
Definitely, especially because there are some apps where, like Snapchat, for example, or they even have this feature on Instagram and Facebook too, where you post a story, and the story shows what you're doing right then, or if it's something you want people to see immediately, they can see it right then, and it only lasts for 24 hours. And so tools like that allow people to make those connections immediately instead of just reaching out to a few people when they've accomplished something. And I think that that's where we like to, with those accomplishments or things that we're happy or things that we want others to perceive about us, we'll put it out immediately as opposed to processing it fundamentally and sharing it with people that would foster that in a more genuine way than just a like on Instagram or something.
Did you want to add to this, Shawn? I'm hogging this microphone.
Yeah, I would actually, I agree with absolutely everything she said. And it's funny, I was actually talking to a colleague about this earlier today, who is more of like an older millennial who uses Facebook. She's like, I'll post a picture of my daughter so my family in Ohio can see it. And that's about all I use social media for. Whereas, especially when it comes to like Snapchat and Instagram stories and things like that, people are processing a lot of what happens in their life online as it's happening, rather than necessarily like talking to people in person, which I think is kind of like a older generation kind of custom to do. And so they'll be processing things online as it's happening, and kind of that you can, especially if like it's something like TikTok, you can see thought processes as they develop over time of processing different things that are happening.
I'd also like to say, in terms of what we were talking about with processing things online, people also, I think this is more typically a Gen Z and millennial thing, people will make these things called spam accounts or Finstas, and they're almost like private diaries that they can curate who exactly follows the account, and they'll type everything out without reaching out to like an individual person on how they're feeling. It's almost like, and people use them for different reasons, but it's almost like, you know, to get a reaction from someone or to share it to everyone and see who's the first one to respond to you and to see who is really there for you, almost like a way of reassurance instead of reaching out to a genuine, true relationship that you might have in real life. And part of that can be a lack of social skills, which I'm sure we'll get into with the way that it's affected relationship building in general. But I think social media allows people to type things out online and redo what they've said as opposed to saying things and avoiding the anxiety of actually talking to people. But that goes back to, if you only process things online, how are you going to make it in the real world?
Yeah, there's a lot. Sorry, apparently my mic issues are better, so I'm gonna go with this now. So there is a lot about that we can kind of continue to unpack, but I want to bring Lexi into the conversation here and go back to TikTok, at least as one of the social medias that you use. So Gen Z, of course, highly active on social media and well-versed in the social media economy. They tend to understand the power of influencer marketing and the role of these platforms in shaping public opinion. And Lexi, you are particularly active on TikTok, and you produce content that is niche-specific and fun. How did you get started doing that, and why are you doing it today?
So I have a TikTok account, and it is very, like you said, niche-specific. It's kind of interesting to see how social media works because back when I was little, I was really interested in something called K-pop. If you guys know what BTS is, yeah. Korean pop. And when I was younger, a lot of people did not know what that was. And so as I've gotten older and social media has become so big in my life, and I have Instagram and TikTok specifically, I would just scroll through my For You page, and Hugo, as you said, like it curates to what they think you would like, right? So I would like a few videos of TikTok, and all of a sudden my whole feed is Korean pop. And so I've noticed that there's finally like a community I can reach out to talk about the specific interests I've had since I was little. And it was just so interesting to me because when I was younger and I would travel everywhere, there would be nothing available for me to, dive into this interest until I found TikTok, and I seen how many people it has reached out to, and like millions of people now are interested in K-pop. And it's just so interesting to me because I felt so alone when I was younger, and now I finally can reach out to people who had a similar interest as me. So that's what kind of got me into posting. I've seen people do it, and I was like, you know what, let me just post a random video. And it's just crazy because it was honestly a 10-second video I posted on TikTok that's directed at K-pop, and then the next day I woke up and had 1 million views. Then the next day I had 2 million views, and then the next day I would get 1,000 followers. So that's kind of what got me started, just posting a random video and figuring out that there is a community out there that I can connect with, which is something that I was wishing for since I was younger. And then after that, I just continued to keep posting, continue to keep growing my content. I got my sister into it because she also had the same issue I did. And it kind of also brought me closer to a lot of my friends. They would see all the content I was posting, and they would honestly get interested in it too and start posting their own. And so it's kind of just become this thing that almost is like a routine for us now, it's like very bittersweet. We feel like every time we hang out, it's so fun. We look forward to it, but then we're also like filming half of it half the time to have content for social media. But at the same time, I do kind of try to take it in a positive note and see it as like my memory book, like my diary for all these things I've done, and just to see, be able to look back at it and see what I've done and how I've grown on social media.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, Lexi, my mom is obsessed with BTS, so I thought I'd say that. And I wanted to touch on what you talked about, finding an online community. So around the time I got on Instagram and social media, I also started to get into this band called Florence and the Machine. Shout out to anyone who might know who they are. And yeah. And living in Wichita, there's not a lot of people that share my same interests. And like Lexi said, finding that community and curating that community and finding those friends, I mean, it takes a lot of trust, and it takes a lot of watching your boundaries for sure, and watching what you share and who you talk to and learning how to read people. And it's really hard to read people online. It takes a lot of practice. But it also created a sense of safety for me and feeling like I was seen and heard. And it motivated me to get more involved with this band on social media too. I run a podcast with 2 friends related to this band that I met online. I've been able to travel across the country to see this band and meet up with friends that I've met online. That's not something I would be able to do if social media wasn't there for me. But like I said, there are risks that come to that, as we've seen in relationships and stalkings and kidnappings, but there are really great benefits to that as well, as there's so many outlets to have a community online.
So maybe before we go into anything else, how can people keep themselves safe knowing the kinds of terrible things that can happen?
I think you have to make sure you're not completely sucked in to the online world. If you lose that disconnect between what's real and what's not, you're going to get lost. And I remember when I first started getting into the band, I was very much on my phone all the time because I wanted to talk to these people that shared the same things as me, and I wanted to feel heard because I couldn't do that in real life. But I still tried to make sure that I was spending time with the people I loved and the friends that I have, and being involved in other things like school and dance and volunteering. And so I think that's one of the most important things to do.
Hugo, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I think one of the questions I wanted to ask was like being aware of certain actors online in terms of why some people are there for certain reasons or different perspectives and stuff like that, and having all that kind of meld together. Is that part of also, being, keeping a safe distance and knowing what you're dealing with?
Definitely, yeah. And I think you can learn from others too, and when you see the mistakes that people make online and the repercussions that come with that, especially Twitter, you can scroll back years on Twitter and people will save stuff, even on Instagram too. And so it takes a lot of conscious effort on, I think, our part and also the people that we're interacting with, and also searching for those connections in real life too. I mean, it can be really easy to feel like we're alone, but if we're not talking to other people and trying to look for those things in other people, then we can get really caught up in feeling completely isolated.
So it's just hard to kind of figure out whether you're engaging with somebody who's acting in good faith, right?
Definitely, it can be. And I think a lot of that one way I'm usually able to tell is based on how someone treats me and then how they treat someone else. Just seeing how their interactions play out with different people in their lives. If it's not consistent, then it's not a trustworthy relationship to have. Or even if you look at the pictures they post and the captions that they share, we can recognize red flags if we learn what they are.
So that brings up a couple of thoughts for me, and I'm curious about what all of you think about this. That the idea of social media kind of being this place where you create your brand and you put out this brand is like, to what degree is authenticity, like to what degree does that become an issue when you're largely forming relationships, or at least a big part of social life now is about forming relationships through social media, where, it's my brand and your brand and our brands are meeting each other and they like each other, but they're our brands, it's not authentic. So to what degree is that true? Lexi, what would you like to say?
I was just thinking about that, and like the authenticity of social media, it is like, I think we mentioned it earlier, how like people post positive things in their life, they post good things going on in their life. And I've noticed myself too that I've kind of been guilty of that and feeling as if I can only post certain things, or I pay a lot more attention to what I post. Even through my TikTok, I've gotten like some like mini brand deals where I can, post these nails that they sent me, or post like a plushie that they sent me. And it also makes me wonder, like, if I'm posting this for out of my pure enjoyment. I've seen a lot of people on TikTok kind of like ridicule or just like comment on different influencers about things that they're promoting online as if it's like they're just doing it for money, right? Mm-hmm. And so one influencer I follow named Bretman Rock, he said that in order to keep the authenticity on social media, you just have to treat it like it's just something for fun. I feel like a lot of people these days treat it like a job or treat it like a business, and which makes sense because a lot of people have been able to retire super early just from doing social media, posting like random videos on YouTube. But I think that kind of makes you lose the idea of what social media kind of started. It was started for us to be able to reach out to people from different areas around the world and just share different things. And so I think when we lose that authenticity when we treat it as if it's something just for us to make money or for something to gain notoriety from. So when I got those like mini brand deals, I was like, I want to post things with these things I'm getting because I do enjoy them, but I also want to make sure that I'm posting it out of the goodness of my heart and not because I'm just getting it for free. I want to make sure I'm doing it with the content I still make and not just doing it out of nowhere, like something completely different than all the things I post on TikTok. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just think it's really important to treat it like something fun. I think we kind of we lost that over the years and how popular social media has become. But definitely treating it like it's something fun and not taking everything too seriously really helps out with mental health as well. Because I've always felt like, oh, I need to film this, I need to film that, this is important, I need to get views, I need to get this amount of likes. But I've had a self-realization, like I don't need all these views, I don't need these likes for reassurance of myself. I just need something fun to do.
It kind of reminds me of how people would talk about individuals who would constantly be taking pictures at an event, and they would say, you're just taking pictures. You're not in it. You're not experiencing. You're just there, like taking the picture. Anyway, that's interesting. I have an audience question here from Alexis. Alexis, please make your way to the microphone. And while she's doing that, were there any other thoughts on that? Hey, Hugo?
Yeah, regarding authenticity, I think it's also up to a culture and also generationally. I think a lot of Gen Zers value authenticity and how we come across and stuff like that. But in terms of branding deals, that's part of it too. There's no such thing as selling out anymore. That doesn't exist. People just, if people understand if you need to make money, you need to make money. That's still authentic. That's them being themselves, That's them living their lives out in the open.
Oh, great point. Alexis, go ahead.
My question is, how can business owners create a healthy boundary between using social media marketing as a tool and not allow the negativity to hinder the progression of promoting your business and their recovery?
Anyone want to jump on that one? Go ahead. Oh, you were sort of reaching toward the microphone.
I mean, I would just be open and honest with your customers. Just like, this is what I'm doing, and this is how I promote myself. But also, like, have something off on the side for your own personal self, so there's a separation between the business and you as an individual, But also, tie yourself to your business at the same time, so people know that it's you and it's what you're doing. So that's what I would say.
There's a really interesting piece in here about allowing or not allowing negativity to kind of stop whatever it is that you're trying to do with social media, whether it's a business that you own and that's what that's what you're using social media for, or if it's just you on social media. It is kind of out there in the ocean of internet, and you get all kinds of reactions to all kinds of posts. What about tips on dealing with that kind of negative feedback that you get sometimes? This kind of negative feedback on whatever it is that you're putting out there.
I think the biggest thing I've learned is that a lot of people, this is probably just like a basic rule, but a lot of people appreciate honesty. So if you just directly address it, I feel like a lot of people just kind of try to push under the rug and not say anything about it. But I think addressing it and just being honest with your audience, that really creates a trusting relationship between you and who you're, serving for. So definitely just making sure that they know that they can trust you. You're not afraid to address these things. It's really important because there's a lot of people who be like, oh, you didn't respond to me, blah, 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 and constantly, bug you about this certain thing you haven't, talked about. But the moment you do address it, then they just go quiet. So I feel like it's really important to be open and honest with people on the internet, because you really can't get caught up in lies, and people will call you out for them. So just keeping that open and honest stream.
Thank you, Alexis. To what degree do those that kind of make notes or comments to your social media platforms, to what degree do they deserve a response in the first place?
I think if they don't use any profanity or if they're not saying anything that's, they attacking anything you can't change about yourself or change about the content itself, that's something that kind of like I wash those things out and don't address those. But if it's something that I feel like I could see myself being, being wrong in, then I will address it. But typically, if it's something that they're just attacking you out for nothing, like no reason, I for my mental health, I just hide the comment. I just don't address it at all, because I just feel like it's something I can't change about myself or change about the thing I'm doing.
So a thought that I had that I actually wanted to bounce off of you is, I know, like, in the court of public opinion, all bets are off. And so somebody's going to be mad at whatever it is you're doing. Somebody's going to have some sort of critique. Somebody's going to be dissatisfied with what you're doing. And in kind of thinking about that, some of the ways that I think about adaptively dealing with that is deleting the comment or hiding the comment or kind of turning a blind eye to the comment just for sanity's sake. And if it is a trend, if you say, you are seeing a pattern where a lot of people are having the same sort of comment to what you've done or sold or said or something, then that might be a little bit more warranting addressing it. But if you are kind of addressing each and every single criticism, you might never get off that one post. Right.
I have an anonymous audience question asking, can you speak about the mental health repercussions of being canceled? And this is something, Shawn, that I wanted to, similar to a question that I wanted to send to you. So would you mind kind of hopping on that one first?
The mental health repercussions of being canceled. That one's rough.
No one wants to get canceled.
No one wants to get canceled.
Sounds bad.
Yeah. And something that I've noticed from social media and kind of like online activity too is that there tends to be little nuance in kind of the opinions that are being put out there. Because like it's like a double-edged sword where it's like you put it online and it's in black and white, and people are putting kind of like their reactions to a situation and not necessarily the response that they have.
I remember seeing, and it was a year ago, past November, the hashtag No Nuance November going around. I don't know if that was a thing this last year, but it was the year before, and I happened to see it, and I thought, oh boy, that sounded dangerous to me. Like, nuance seems important in life to me, but it seemed to be a very popular hashtag. What do we do? What do we do with that? Help.
Yeah. That one's hard. And I think in some ways it is something to navigate carefully. Because the reactions are in black and white, and they are kind of like they don't carry a lot of nuance. Mm-hmm. The dissatisfaction is absolute. Mm-hmm. And whenever you are facing a situation where you are facing getting canceled, in some ways, I think the internet can be unforgiving. And you made this mistake, you're done. And at the same time, I think there's something to be said for kind of like what you were talking about, like addressing it, where like I heard this quote in a TV show recently where it was like, they don't care about your words, they want to see you do better. And so kind of like being able to show that you are hearing what is being said and hearing the criticism and being able to actively address it can be helpful.
Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of go off of what you were saying there. I actually just got out of my domestic violence class not too long ago, and we were talking about like once an abuser, always an abuser, and what exactly that means, if that's true, and we dissected that a lot. And the conversation we had just kind of reminds me of the conversation we're having now. I think people make mistakes. We're all human and we're all going to make mistakes. We all have these beliefs and stereotypes and things that have been socialized for generations. And I think our generation has become a lot better at picking those things out. And I think, like Lexi said, it's important to be intentional about what you're posting. So if you're the one being canceled, I think that's an important self-reflection moment for that person. And I think it's important to listen to what the people are saying. But I think it's also important on the other side of things to be self-reflective too. I mean, if someone was coming at me for something that I did or something that I said, I would be wanting to change that. And I would be willing to do what it takes to change, kind of like what Shawn said. And I think that it can be really hard to let go of grudges too. I mean, I struggle with that, and I struggle to really give people a second chance sometimes, but you know, our age now, we're Gen Zers, we have so much time in life to recover from things and to try to forgive people and to learn from what other people are doing so that we can continue to better ourselves and how we perceive ourselves on social media.
There does seem to be kind of a psychological effect at play there too, though, that if you tell me that I'm a bad person, I will defend myself. I won't say, why? What did I do? You know, just in general, you see that reaction a lot. People will dig their heels in about whatever it is that they were confronted about and defend their position. No, it wasn't me. You misunderstood me. That's not what I meant. That's not who I am. Here's this and this and this, you know, my little pieces of evidence to prove to you that I'm not bad in whatever way. And, you know, like it seems like that it's really hard to find an actual way to like peel through those different like layers to get to an understanding. And it isn't helped at all by the fact that I'm not actually in the room with you. You know, you might be in another country. You know, like, it's just, yeah. What about that? Great question, yes. What about that?
I think I was also going to say that when it comes to that self-reflection and really digging into what needs to be changed, I think everyone in this room could probably agree that in some point in their lives when they've been told that something's wrong, or if they've been constructively criticized in some way, that our gut reaction is to be defensive and to explain, you know, what we did in that situation that was right, not focusing on the wrong, instead of admitting, not necessarily admitting to it, but coming to terms with, oh, this is what I need to fix. Maybe that doesn't make me a bad person. This is just something that could improve how other people see me and how I can make a difference in the world.
I think adding to that too is it's not necessarily like the should that everybody should do, but something that is extremely helpful is parsing apart like the person's identity from the actions, because like if somebody said like you are a liar, that is like an identity kind of label, and that's really hard for somebody to hear, and it's much more likely for somebody to be defensive when they hear that versus like you said this thing and it was a lie. And I've seen it actually happen pretty. It takes time, and I've seen it happen mildly successfully on the internet when people are facing really difficult kind of accusations about their identity, to parse out the identity piece from the action and kind of addressing, this is the action that you are kind of upset with me for doing, and here's what I can do to address that. But this is not an identity label that I am going to accept as, who I am.
Were you going to add something, Hugo?
Yeah, I just think there needs to be a consideration in terms of being canceled. The other side of it, the people that are actually mad. Sometimes, a lot of times, those trauma, that's earned. There's a reason they're mad, and it's probably right, and you have to understand that they're affected in a certain way, and I think you have, as an individual, have to realize that and take that into consideration, and try to understand that these people have the right to feel this way.
Absolutely. Will you all share, Emily, maybe if you want to start with this, a little bit about what you recommend to people who are struggling with the effects of being constantly plugged in, and just kind of ways to kind of unplug?
So everyone copes with stress and uneasiness in different ways, especially because some people are naturally extroverted and some people are naturally introverted. So personally for me, like I said earlier, I like to mute my apps. I check them periodically. I only keep certain apps on if there's certain people that I know that I like to talk to and won't stress me out. And every day that I come home from work, I do tangible activities. I have a paint by sticker book that I use, puzzles, reading books, watching shows, making sure that I'm doing organic activities that foster what makes me cope with uneasy emotions. Now, on the other hand, if you're extroverted, it might be more difficult for you to break away from that social media aspect of things. But then you have to look at, how can I do that in real life? How can I make more genuine connections in real life compared to just me talking to someone through a screen? Not that that negates the value of that friendship or how close the friendship really is. It's just important to make sure you have a balance so that, like we discussed earlier, you don't lose that sense of reality.
I have an audience question here from Jessica, who asks, do you think this quick turnaround with a moment being posted or shared before being emotionally processed is affecting younger people's ability to process life events? Like instead of processing, we're just sort of putting it out there, and then, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this kind of goes back to something that I mentioned before about how like people are processing things online as they happen, which can be difficult because like I mentioned, like once you put it online, it's there, and the internet is forever, and so there is a bit of difficulty that comes with wanting to be able to post your reaction to a situation rather than emotionally processing it and then giving your response. And so taking time to, like even just kind of noticing that you have this impulse to want to respond to the thing in the moment, and kind of taking a moment to take a step back and just notice what's going on in your body and your emotions and your thoughts, and maybe even journal it a little bit. It's not. I feel like it's almost a cliche at this point, but journaling is honestly like the wonder drug for therapy.
With a piece of paper and a pen. Or,
Sometimes.
Or on a computer, is that okay?
Yeah. Some
Okay.
people,
But not to share.
yeah, don't like post your journal entry.
It sounds like that's a thing nowadays, too.
It can be, yeah. But definitely just like on a piece of paper if you like to write, or on Microsoft Word or something like that, if you like your computer. Just journaling it, getting it out of your head onto paper or digital paper. I need to look into it more because I've been bringing it up a lot lately, but it is honestly like magical how it's able to let you process what's going on, and whatever uneasy emotions you might be feeling, you kind of get to feel that release from it coming out onto paper, so that whenever you do end up posting it online, it's a little bit more refined of a thought.
Very good. Lexi, you've taken a social media presence and then also brought it into the real world. And you were talking about how this was a way for you to connect with other people with similar interests. They were all over the place. But you also were able to kind of connect here locally with special events for that local niche of your niche audience. Can you talk a little bit about what you've learned and what works?
Social media is definitely a powerful thing. So me and my friends, we hosted this event to celebrate one of the BTS members. It sounds so random when I say it on here, but when you find that community who understands and does the same thing in their towns, it's just really crazy to see how many people actually are interested in that thing. So when we hosted the event, we went on Facebook, which is odd because we were just talking about how Facebook is not for the younger generation. But Facebook is really a good place to market for different events. You find actually a lot of older people who are interested in K-pop as well. It was really interesting to see the turnout for our event. We had about 200 people come. Some people found it all the way from Topeka. Some people went from Missouri, just all the way came down to Wichita, Kansas, just to come to this event to celebrate with other people who had the same interests as them. And the age range was insane. It was like maybe like we would see like toddlers all the way up to, I think the oldest I've seen was like probably like a 6-year-old, which is really awesome to see just the community come together. So social media is really powerful. We literally just posted this one little flyer on Facebook. We posted it on Instagram, and now I feel like people understand how powerful social media is. It gives you the option to advertise through those platforms. So when we use those platforms, and we can choose to be like a business profile, or we can choose to even sponsor the flyer on Instagram so random people can see it on their feed. It's just crazy to know how like impactful that is to someone, like that they're willing to drive 4+ hours to come to a small little town in Kansas to do something like that. So social media does have its ups. It definitely does. It's created a lot of connections across the nation, across for your community that you're interested in. So luckily we have seen the positives of it, being able to engage with people from all around Kansas, all around Missouri, just the Midwest in general. So yeah, it's just really something really cool that we got to do, and we are planning to do another one. So honestly, it was really fun and successful.
Here's a related audience question. Do you feel like the ability to find people with similar interests online keeps you from finding connections close by and ultimately causing one to feel more isolated?
That is a really good question. I think it is 50-50. I've seen people on social media. So my friend, she met K-pop friends through Twitter, and they would talk a lot every day directly on Twitter. Maybe they moved on to phone number as they gained trust with one another. For her, she, luckily she was able to find a community in person, and so when we hang out, we have that similar interests, and we're able to, our friendship has grown stronger since then, and so we found more people through that event too, and just through friendships that we have personally. We were able to grow that relationship in person and find more people and kind of be more encouraged to go out and find more people who have that same interest. But on the other hand, when there's people on social media who rely on relationships on social media, I do feel like they're kind of stuck there, and they feel like they're stuck there. They feel like that's the only place they can find a connection, or because I have a lot of comments on my videos like, oh, I wish I had these friends in real life. I can't find any friends like this in real life. Oh, you guys are so lucky, blah, blah, blah. And I feel like that does kind of manipulate their minds to make them think that, oh, social media is the only place I can rely on to have these connections.
Well, it does seem like younger people sometimes struggle with the in-person socializations and, not wanting to have a meeting in person or even take a phone call in person or these sorts of things that they'd rather send a text message, that sort of thing. It really makes you wonder if the problem is the pervasiveness of social media, where that problem lies, I guess, because is it just a habit that we've fallen into, that this is how we relate to each other, or, kind of where does that begin? Emily, you were going to say something?
Yeah, kind of going off of that, not just with social media in general, but with technology itself. I see that a lot with my clients because I think technology has become so normalized in our society that we just expect everyone to know how to use it, and we expect everyone to have access to it, which is not the case at all. I work with people who are in the low income cohort of Kansas, and these people have severe mental illnesses too. And so with not COVID, especially with how much that forced us to be online and forced us to make online connections with people and maintain real life connections through the internet, I think that had a ton of repercussions. I have clients who will be too nervous to call the dentist unless I'm there, and they'll be full-grown adults. And so many places in Wichita now just do things over the phone instead of having those in-person meetings or conversations because of convenience. Because I'm not going to lie, social media is really convenient. Zoom is great. But there's people that don't know how to use Zoom, and we just expect them to know how to. And that can make someone really nervous, and it can make them feel like they're left out. And another thing, too, that just frustrates me beyond belief, that I'm sure most of the people in this room would agree with, is when you call a place and you're talking to a robot, and you're told you have to listen to all the different keypads before you can actually talk to someone. Not everyone has the patience to do that. And so that's also something that I think we've become very desensitized to, and it's just grown to be an expectation for all of us.
So social media kind of has changed the game in really big, broad ways societally. But now there are also new technologies coming around the bend that might transform things in other ways. Artificial intelligence being one that I'm hearing spoken about quite a bit. Hugo, can you talk about emerging technologies that you kind of have your eye on, and how might they change the game?
Sure. In terms of artificial intelligence, for the trend recently has been AI generated art, and people doing kind of portraits of themselves, but then again, ethically, it's taking art from other artists who that aren't their own. So it's just like, is this ethical? Another technology that I have been keeping an eye on is AR, augmented reality, in terms of superimposing things onto, like if you do a Snapchat filter or Instagram filter or something like that, that's like the camera's superimposing something on your face. And those tools are pretty useful for practical stuff in life as well. So, things can be kind of workshopped in social media a little bit to the point where it can move on to more practical effects in the real world.
The AR, you're talking about when you give yourself antlers and deer ears
Yeah,
or whatever.
exactly.
Okay. Where might it go from there, Hugo?
Well, I mean, if you open the hood of a car, let's say, and you put your phone camera up, and it'll tell you what each point of the car is or how to fix it or something like that, right? So, I mean, things like that work in other industries and can be translated to something a bit more practical.
So it could be very practical, but it also could make trouble,
Yes.
as with many things in life. We are starting to get close to time here. I do want to ask you all if you think kind of what are some of the main tips that you would give to people to either unplug or somehow identify what is the best use of internet and social media for them. Go ahead, and we'll start with you, Shawn.
So two things come to mind. One creative way that I think of to kind of help check your investment in technology and online media and things like that is to just do something spontaneous with your day. Like if you go home at the end of your day and you spend an hour on social media and that's your typical routine, switch up your routine. Do something else. Maybe go to a bookstore or the mall or go work out or something like that, and put that interruption in your day and see how you respond to it. And kind of in the middle of that is the second thing. There's this approach to therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, created by Marsha Linehan. It's a skills-based sort of therapy. It's super helpful. I recommend it for everybody in some context or another. But she has this skill called STOP, and it's an acronym, where the S is just stop whatever it is that you're doing. T, take a step back. O,
Physically take a step back?
sometimes it's necessary,
Okay.
yeah. Like if you are heading to your couch and you realize that that's a thing, like walk to the kitchen. O is observe your surroundings and kind of like where you're at. And then P is proceed mindfully. And so like really just drawing out the movements that you take and really assessing what it is that you're doing. And like if you find that you're doom scrolling on TikTok or something, and you notice that, literally just putting the phone down, getting up off of the couch or the bed, and like taking stock of like what it is that you're feeling in your body, and taking a very deliberate next step, whatever that is, to turn the phone off, to walk outside and go on a walk, to go make dinner, to do something else.
Before we keep going down the line here, I want to insert an audience question here. Vicky, who asks, what strategies can parents or grandparents use to protect the self-esteem of teen girls? Emily, can you weigh in on that one?
I think making sure that you're checking in on them, but also not overly controlling what they're doing. Because if you try to force someone, or if they can tell that they're constantly being watched and they don't trust their parent, they're going to stray away even further. That's going to make them want to explore what they're missing out on. So I think it's important for parents to be conscious and making sure that they're involved in their children's lives, making sure that their children are still engaging in the present moment, and maybe reminding their children to take a step back if they need to. And that also has to do with building trust with your child throughout their entire lives. If your child doesn't trust you, they're not going to come to you if they're experiencing negative self-esteem caused by someone else online. I know there were times where I didn't feel comfortable coming to my parent, or social media also can sometimes seem stupid when you're talking about it, and it can seem so minuscule and not important compared to the larger aspect of our society, but it can have very detrimental effects to a person's well-being, especially teenagers, because teenagers' brains are still developing, they're still learning social skills, they're going through puberty, so a lot of them process things online through other people instead of with other people in real life.
How would a parent know when they are kind of in the right space between too much and too little?
I think when they can see that their child is coming to them and talking to them about things, I think that if they catch on signals, or if they see things that they can tell are really bothering their child, or if they see that their child is constantly on their phone when there's other people around, it's important to remind them to take a step back, and also talk with them about why they're so connected. Because if they find out the reason why, then they can help them navigate through that and find solutions in real life.
Thank you. Hugo, let's come to you as far as that healthy balance between virtual and real world interactions, or just the use of the internet in general. What would you suggest?
Well, what Emily described earlier with how older generations engage with social media, that perfectly describes how I engage with social media. It is a secondary thing to me. I do put my real world relationships, kind of at the forefront, and I kind of augment that by with social media in terms of how I engage with them outside of when I'm not with them and stuff like that, and just like keeping yourself grounded, I guess, in with a small circle, and then being aware of when you're reaching out and when you're engaging with somebody who you don't know, and then keep your wits about you and make sure that sometimes they're not acting in good faith, and understand that, and try to shake it off, I guess. Yeah, and I've been listening to a couple of NPR Live Kit episodes, and they had an episode on rebranding, and one of the things they talked about is doing a social audit, and just see what you're putting out into the world as well, and whether that represents you, and try to figure that out. I think that's also important, that what you're also putting out into the world is honest and authentic as well.
Lexi, I want to get your tips, but I also have an audience question that I would like to send to you here. Off the top of your head, please give an example of social media making the world a better place. What would you say to that, as well as your tips?
Social media makes the world a better place. I think I said this before, just like connection, right? You can connect with so many people from around the world. And I actually was just talking about this with my parents. We used to go to travel to Vietnam when I was younger, and I always wondered, I was like, how did you get in contact with them? Like, how do we know where to go? How do we know different places in Vietnam, or, if the people there still remember us, because we had no form of, communication with them at all. So that was a struggle back then, but as we've gone, as years passed by, from 2006 all the way jumped to 2012, we finally have social media. They have access now to Facebook, so we're able to connect with them on Facebook and keep up with them and they're in a whole different country. So I think just keeping a connection alive is something that social media does, is a positive thing that it does, because it really is something you can use to keep friendships alive. I met someone in Houston that I still talk to this day, and I haven't seen her since. So it's just something that's really good for that part of life.
Thank you. Emily, I want to come to you for the last word here. Whatever tips that you have for kind of making that balance happen in individuals' lives, and just what you would recommend for people.
I think if you're someone that has trouble processing things on your own, I think it's important to navigate why and what prevents you from doing so. I think everyone benefits from therapy. It's a scary thing to do because you're being so vulnerable and you're putting your emotions out there and you're processing them and you're doing something with it. But that's the most effective way to come to terms with what's bothering me? Why do I feel this way about something? And I think also finding ways to ground yourself. I think that's been a common denominator in all the things that we've talked about here. There's lots of different grounding exercises you can do. And grounding is essentially just bringing yourself back into the present. If you feel your mind wandering somewhere else, going somewhere else, bring yourself back. Remind yourself that you're safe. And you can do that by doing sensory exercises, focusing on your breathing. Some people like meditating, just focusing on their thoughts and observing them rather than letting them spiral out. But also, as I said earlier, people cope with the anxieties and stressors from social media in different ways, just because we're all different. So I think finding the most tangible way that works for you is something that we all have to navigate personally.
Thank you all so much for this interesting discussion. I really appreciate your time. Let's have a round of applause for our panel. And thank you all for joining this important conversation, and do please check out the library's further reading resource guide on your way out. You can also find the recording of this and other Engage ICT discussions at engageict.org that you can share with your friends and family. For KMUW, I'm Sarah Jane Crespo, and the winner of a KMUW window shade is Holly Terrell and Andy Tade. Both are our winners. We have those for you here at our swag table. Thank you all very much for coming. We appreciate your time. Good evening.